All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to continue with the Conversation for Liberation podcast. And as you can see, we have reconvened the Smart Recovery Roundtable to continue on with the points. We are missing one. Unfortunately, Amit was no longer able to continue because of some personal commitments. Thank him for everything that he did. But we're going to continue on without him, keeping these conversations going. So today we're going to talk about point 3 in the Smart Recovery 4-point program, which is managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And I thought I'd start off with the philosophy that we were literally just talking about before we pushed that record button. The concepts of unconditional acceptance. So this is a huge thing that shows up for me when I'm working in DBT and schema therapy perspective, looking at things from a parts point of view. But when we're looking at it in smart recovery, this is kind of like the foundation of everything that we do, particularly when we get into point 3. Let's start off the conversation then just talking about the philosophy of unconditional acceptance of self, unconditional acceptance of others, and unconditional acceptance of life itself. So let's get the conversation rolling, guys. Who wants to start us off?
Well, I can say that for me and for what I share with a lot of people is that it generally started for me with general unconditional acceptance of others,
Hmm.
right? And once I was able to kind of acknowledge that external influence that I receive is something that whether I agree with it or not, I can accept it and I can, acknowledge that it's going to be there and validate that that's in existence, right? Whether that be work influences, the weather, culture, anything going on in the world. Then I was able to start going, okay, now I can go more internal and work on the acceptances of myself. And that was kind of how that process was for me. And I generally just try to kind of share that with people in my meetings and help encourage them to, dive into that on their own. I'm sure it starts off differently for other people, but that was usually the process for me.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of unconditional acceptance of others, unconditional acceptance of self is the thing that makes Smart a little bit more unique compared to, well, REBT, the philosophy that's underneath Smart Recovery. It's what makes it a little bit different to, say, cognitive therapy. This unconditional acceptance of self. Like, what does that? How does that show up in your conversations? How does that show up in your meetings? And how do you bring that philosophy to other people?
Well, I wrote a blog post for Smart on unconditional self-acceptance, how my journey of unconditional self-acceptance, and they actually published it on the website, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
So, I had a lot of guilt and shame over some of the things I had done in my active addiction. So, my journey consisted of like looking kind of taking a step back and looking at my past self and talking to her like, I know she's in pain. I know all these things have happened to her and she did some things that don't align with my values now, but I can accept her and love her right where she is. And we can cry together and bring her to the present where, where I am now, and I have values that I have defined in my hierarchy of values, and I'm living by those values now. So I can tolerate that, yeah, I didn't always live according to the values that I have now, but I'm a different person now, and I am making better decisions, and I'm moving toward the life I want to live. Yeah, I did some things. I made some bad choices. I hurt a lot of people. Not that that's okay, but I can accept myself for who I am, and it's just part of my story. And if those things hadn't happened and I hadn't done some of those things, I wouldn't have the story that I have now that I can help other people with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, really good. Pam, how do you look at it when you're talking about unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional acceptance of others? How does that show up for you in your meetings?
Well, the thing that I find tricky to explain and to wrap my head around myself is the fact that unconditional acceptance does not mean I approve,
Hmm.
you know? So that is something I don't know, it comes up a lot because a lot of people associate acceptance with approval, and it's just I don't even know how to explain it right now, to be honest.
I know that shows up quite a bit in DBT, because the skill that we bring to that is radical acceptance, right? Because
Right.
the when we're looking at the thing that we're trying to accept, a lot of people, like you say, have this belief, well, I don't want to accept that, because therefore I'm saying it's okay. I'm saying it's all right
Hmm.
that happened, right? When in actuality, what we're trying to accept most of the time, or where we start with the acceptance, is the why, not the what, right? Because
Right,
if we can
exactly.
accept the why, like why that person is doing that, what's the emotional experience that they're going through, what's the story that they've got about that particular situation, I can accept that why. Therefore, I'm removing the personalized story that I'm attaching to it, right? In other words, the meaning that I'm attaching to this particular scenario is that you're doing this because you don't love me. Whereas in actuality, the reason that you're doing it is because you're emotionally distressed right now, and you've got a different story activated in your system, and it's got nothing to do with me,
Hmm.
right? I can accept that why. Now I can set a boundary around what's being done without the emotional connection to why it's being done, right? That's how that shows up for me. I don't know if that makes sense for you.
It makes perfect sense, and you explained it beautifully. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Erin, what about you, man? How does it show up for you?
Oh, same way that you guys were describing there. For me, I guess when Thomas was talking about learning to accept others before being able to accept himself, a part of me was like, but that's not possible. And then I was like, oh, there's a curious part of me that thinks that it's not possible for Thomas to experience what he says he's experienced. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, I experienced that too, when it comes to recognizing that I can like or tolerate or accept things that people do that I don't like easier than I can myself at times. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like I would start to tolerate, people misbehaving around me or disrespecting me. And it wasn't until I was able to stop them from doing that to me that I could stop me from doing that to me. You know what I mean? And I get that, setting personal boundaries externally. And then recognizing, like when Jody was talking about, my hindsight bias at times, like that, the things I'd done, versus the parts of me that pop up today that are hard for me to accept. And when Stephen was saying exploring the why is where I'm at, in that there's parts of me that are self-aggrandizing that I don't like. There's parts of me that are attention seeking I'm not really particularly fond of. The need for external validation, the parts of me that can bully people or manipulate to get my way. These are the parts where I don't want them to perform because they're not allowing me to be who I want to be. But rather than, what do they say, like ostracizing or just trying to like put them off and say, this isn't who I am, I'm not that person. Well, obviously there's parts of me that are. And it's like, well, let's get curious with why they think they need to be this way. Like, so that exploration of being able to internally validate the not being the pig at times because I'm feeding a part of my personality that is not in line with who I want to be. But not saying that I'm not that thing. It's just I am this thing, or there's parts of me that are this way, and learning to accept them rather than saying I don't, I have a devil inside me, if you will, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
And when we're talking about managing thoughts and feelings and then those behaviors, right? It makes perfect sense to start with that, looking at this unconditional acceptance of others, unconditional acceptance of ourselves, because we're starting to separate the stories, which are the thoughts, right? The things, the beliefs that we've got about what's going on in the world, what's going on with us, what's going on with other people, to work on the feelings. And it's the feelings then that are activating, from the way that I look at it, it's the feelings then that are activating those behavioral responses, right? And the feelings, if you are shutting down a particular part of your personality or shutting down a particular belief that's in your system as being bad or wrong, or, I'm not fond of this, you're actually building up things like guilt and shame inside of your system. And then these are those big emotions that are sitting underneath there that we're afraid of, and it activates those behavioral responses, right? So everything that you're saying makes perfect sense to start with it. Obviously, it's really easy, right? We just go, yeah, let's just accept ourselves and everything will be great. It's a piece of cake to do. Are there
That
any? Go ahead, Jodie.
what you were saying kind of makes me think of the ABC, how
Yeah.
when you think about the cognitive triangle, it's like my thoughts lead to feelings, my feelings lead to behaviors, my behaviors lead to thoughts and all that.
Yeah.
And I talk about that when I present the ABC in my meetings, how everything is all intertwined. And when we go into an ABC, usually like I try to identify the consequence first, the C. It's like, what am I feeling? What am I doing? What's my emotional upset causing me to feel and do? So that's the C. And then we can go back and find the A, which is the activating event. Like, what happened that I am doing this to myself, that I'm feeling this way? And then when we go to find the B, we have to find, like I tell my people in my meetings, that we have to find the should, whatever it is I think I should be doing, or I think other people should be doing, like that person should be treating me better, or I should be doing this better, whatever it is. Most of the time, there's a should. But so then we dispute that. And like when we go to the D, I know we're going out of order, but that's the way we teach it.
Yeah.
And we go to the D, we dispute it. Is it true? Is it logical? Is it helpful? That belief.
Yeah.
So, and it has to be all three of those things. And then when we get to the E, the effective new belief, it's like, what can I tell myself that's going to help me to feel better about the A, the activating event that happened? So it all ties in together. And then I like to say that we use the ABC to get to the unconditionals. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's a vehicle to get me to the unconditional other acceptance, or the unconditional life acceptance, because it's not something like I don't just automatically accept things that happen.
You
I
don't?
no, imagine that. So like I have to process it. Like, how am I going to accept this? Okay, let's do an ABC, and that helps me.
Yeah, when I always think when we start talking about acceptance, I spent a couple of years working in residential treatment and as a counselor in a couple of different residential treatment settings. And honestly, like working in that environment, the word acceptance is thrown around it's like being given out like candy. It's like, well, you got to accept this. We have to accept that. You got to accept this. You have to accept that. You need to accept these things. But nobody ever explains how to do it. It's just, well, you're supposed to just accept it.
Well, can I say, Stephen, to that, you taught that formula of there's something that I want that I can't have, and it's
Yeah.
not the catastrophe that I think it is that I can't have it. And
Yeah.
that helps me with something as simple as the computer not going as quick. Like when I'm going to log into a meeting and it's going, please wait, if you will, and it's spinning, and there's a part of me going, they're all staring at my screen right now, seeing that I'm having computer problems, fucking that, and it's just ruined. It's like I got no control over this. So in that moment, I can calm my system just by saying what you're saying. But in that, like when Jody was talking about all the demands, yeah, I have a strong belief that this shouldn't be happening right now,
Yeah.
right? Like this, I shouldn't have to cope with this. I should have a quicker computer. There's a lot of demands. One thing I want to throw out that I find in our ABCDEFG exercise is somewhat skipped over is our validation and appreciation for the emotional experience, which you've taught us through the Raven exercise. And I pause at the B quite often before, because I do the same way Jody did. I go CAB.
Yeah. I was always
and then
taught to start with the when I went through the smart recovery training years ago, it was always to start with the C. So I don't know.
Because it's how we find like there's something
Yeah.
I'm doing that I don't want to do. Okay, well, what's creating it? Right. So we start with that C, jump over to the A. At the B, I dig down that downward arrow exercise.
Mhm.
Like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Get to the root of it. And then I basically tell myself it's okay. You know what I mean? And then I could start moving on to a D. But if I'm really looking at, because this is where I think that the cognitive therapy thing starts leaking in. It's like, I'm not looking to say I have stinking thinking or I have, once again, irrational beliefs. What I want to do is exercise the fact that I can explore what I'm thinking and ask myself, is that all that's happening? Right? Is it effective? Is it helpful to think of the way that my usual rigid, narrow mind is going in the whole equation of things? But when I look at the way that the exercise is drawn out, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I go, well, if I go right from that C in this sense into the D, I'm going to dismiss and invalidate the fact that there's a part of me that is feeling and thinking something.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, well, let's dispute that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, and to me, that is basically like the cognitive therapy approach of stinking thinking.
Yeah.
Like that's why I really find it helpful to spend time on the B, and then also take time to appreciate and validate before moving on in the exercise. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, 100%. And I know you guys were saying before that they've changed the disputing irrational beliefs over to disputing unhelpful beliefs, I think you were saying, in the new manual that's out. I used to switch it when I used to do smart recovery meetings before, because I still used to call it dibs, but I used to say it was disputing ineffective beliefs, because I didn't like that whole irrational aspect of things because of the training I've got in DBT, and trying not to label things like that, because then we're kind of bringing like a shame and a guilt, and like you're saying with stinking thinking, or when people talk about character defects, things like that, for me, it's about that's pushing away that unconditional self-acceptance when we start talking about things being character defects, stinking thinking, irrational beliefs. So we want to start to try to accept those things, by just looking at them as not being effective for us to do what we want to do or be who we want to be. That's the way I looked at IBS.
Something that Aaron just kind of touched on too, that it's been helpful for me when it comes to the acceptances is, recognizing things that are and are not within my control. When it comes to accepting something that maybe I don't approve of, I can still accept it because quite often those are things that I have no control over. So for me to battle against it and die on that hill of this is wrong and I can't stand this, that's not helpful for me. That doesn't benefit me in any way. Um, Everybody's got their causes and things that they believe in, but um, ultimately, for me to lose sleep over something that I have no control over isn't helpful. If my computer's lagging and I start having tech issues and everything crashes, I don't know how to fix that. I don't know what caused it. I have no control over that. All I can do at that point is contact somebody that does. And, then it's still out of my control. It's within their hands. And I can accept that that's what's happening. That's what needs to go on. Here's the steps that I can take that is within my control to correct this scenario. Um, the control piece is big, because I talk to a lot of people in my meetings that are trying to regain some sense of control in their lives. And I know that I was doing the same thing. And releasing that control has been a huge piece of just kind of accepting things as they are and living life on life's terms.
Yeah, I found that, when I was really early in my recovery in the first year or so, I found myself desperately trying to control external things, because internally was wildly out of control. And it was like trying to give me something just to hold on to. If I can control this out here, I can stop this chaos that's going on inside of my system. So I totally get where you're coming from there. So we're looking at disarm, we're looking at, sorry, not disarm, we're looking at dibs, we're looking at ABCs. What about when we get into, we've looked at unconditional acceptance of self and others. What about when we're trying to figure out how to cope with these thoughts, these feelings, and these behaviors? Are we doing any brainstorming inside of meetings? Are we problem solving with anything? Like, how are those things showing up for you inside of meetings? Once you've put across the concepts of unconditional self-acceptance, you're going through ABCs, you're looking at disputing ineffective or unhelpful beliefs. What about when you start to try to problem solve with things and brainstorm about different concepts or things?
Jody, can I say Jody brought up language exchange?
Yeah.
Jody, do you want to elaborate maybe on, and I'll throw in what
Sure. Yeah. We talk about vocabulary exchange and how saying things like this person should be treating me better or my computer should be working, using the word should may not be the most helpful word. So like we can say, okay, this person may not be treating me the way I prefer, and then go on with the ABC or whatever coping statement you need to use at that point. Or like saying things like, I'm a failure, and putting that shame on yourself, saying something like, I may have failed at this one thing, but how can I do better in the future? Like the trying to take the heaviness out of the words that we use, because our words create our reality,
Yeah.
so trying to take the heaviness out of the words that we use, and using words like prefer and choose and want instead of like should, need, can't stand, trying to, you know, make our words a little less heavy so they're not as, daunting in our mental dialogue.
So when we're talking about that vocabulary exchange, one of the things that I thought was really, honestly, kind of profound to me was when somebody said to me years ago that language leads to behavioral rigidity. Because when the impact of that language on us is that it leads to a rigid behavioral response, it leads to a rigid emotional reaction, and it causes all sorts of problems for us. But the one thing that I think is incredibly important for us to remember when we're looking at this kind of language exchange is that we're not trying to completely eradicate certain terms from the vocabulary. So, sometimes when we start talking about these things, people think that, well, I have to get rid of should and shouldn't. I'm not allowed to say it anymore. Or I have to get rid of good or bad because I'm not allowed to say those things anymore. And that in itself is a bit rigid. It's a bit, it's kind of like the opposite of what we're trying to achieve. And I think like when Marsha Linehan talks about this inside of DBT, just to touch on that for a second, I know this is a smart recovery conversation, but just from a DBT perspective, she says we're not trying to get rid of the terms good or bad from our vocabulary because sometimes things are good and sometimes things are bad. She said, if I see a piece of meat that's been left out on the counter for weeks and it's gone bad, I'm not going to say, well, that's an ineffective piece of meat. It's a piece of meat that's gone bad, and therefore I'm not going to eat it. So, we're not trying to remove that language from the things that we're saying completely, but what we're trying to do is notice where it's not helpful. Does that make sense? Do you guys?
It does. Stephen, if I could say, you've thrown at me the time you can call it a penguin if you want.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's because it's not that the words don't matter. This is a funny thing. Dialectical thing about words to me is they mean nothing and they mean everything.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like a word, it's the meaning that I'm holding within it. So when I hear myself using certain words or thinking a certain way, I do ask myself, well, if I was to replace it with penguin, what would it mean then? So then I can explore, well, what's the meaning I'm using? So to what Jody was saying about absolutes, like, I can't handle this. I'm not going to challenge a participant if they're just using that term. But if I can hear the weight in their words as they're using it, I might say to them, is that helpful for you to say? Because obviously you are handling it. You're not liking it. And this is where you've compared the fact that some of us, based on our upbringing, might, compare discomfort to actual trauma or actual danger.
Yeah.
And it's like, what we can't handle versus what we aren't willing to or not wanting to is different. And it is possible that by changing that language, it may make it more tolerable. Not always the case, though. Like I say, Stephen, one for me is I like to speak in I statements, and I think it's really helpful for others too as well. But if I was to just talk to every person who talks to me with comparison, like, Aaron, when we're doing this and we, when da da da, and I go, hey, hold on. It's not when we and you, it's I, because I don't know anything. But there is a part of me that's thinking that because I know how rigid I could carry this stuff, and I'm like, but that's just how people are talking. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily always the case that everyone who speaks in you doesn't have the ability to be accountable. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does, and I'm smiling because in the early days of my recovery journey, where I was trying to teach everybody about everything to do with recovery, because it was a lot easier for me to focus on other people than it was to focus on myself. I was that person who corrected everybody when they were using you statements and trying to switch them into I statements. And one time, this guy stopped me and went, "Can you stop being such a pretentious wanker?" And I was like, oh, I didn't realize I was being that. I was trying to help you. So, yeah, I totally know what you mean by that.
It has its place, the balance, right?
Yeah. And the thing about language is that it is an incredibly powerful thing, right? And it does play a significant role in managing those thoughts and those feelings and those behaviors. Because if we are telling ourselves, like you're saying, Aaron, and yourself, Jody, as well, if we're using those, well, I should be doing this, or I can't handle that, or they shouldn't be speaking to me this way. There's an absolute to that that then is going to create this emotional response, which then kicks in this rigid behavioral response. And when we get stuck in that kind of rigid way of looking at things, we end up going down all sorts of rabbit holes. So just trying to take a step back and look at it from this point of view, in my opinion, opens up the possibility of going in a different direction, just to say the least. I don't know. Does that
Well,
make
and
sense?
sorry, one thing I want to say to that, Stephen, is that when I go through that exploration, that's where the unconditional self-acceptance becomes really difficult, because I land at parts of my personality that I go, well, that's not me. I wouldn't do that. I'm not that way. And it's like, yeah, I am. I have the potential at least to be, and it's like, because I think about it, it's like, wow, there's a part of me that's being a very big bully right now. It's not a bully like, give me all your money, kid. It's more of a bully like, you better do what I demand of you. You better listen to me right now. You better do that. You better do as I've said, or I'm going to use love to counteract and, and withhold it from you, or in some way. It's like, I'm going to bully you to get and it's like, wow, I don't want to be that person. Well, why am I becoming this person? What is the objective here? And accepting that there are parts of my personality in those moments that, like I say, have a behavioral response that doesn't coincide with me being the person I want to be. And accepting that part of me is, I guess, still on a daily basis, the hardest part of this journey, is that those parts of my personality are really hard to deal with. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing. Wow, it sounded like Fargo and Lego. And then I think the big thing that was a really important for me to get my head around, looking at it from that kind of perspective, was the intention behind the behavior, that the part of my personality, or the behavioral response that's kicking in for me. I don't want to get into too much parts language, because I know that's not a huge part of smart recovery, but when there is that behavioral response, the intention behind that behavioral response, or the intention behind that thought process, the intention behind that thing that we do, is usually not what the outcome is. Usually the intention behind it was in some way to try to help, some way to try to comfort, to soothe, to escape from, to keep us safe, to protect in some way. And I think if we start to get our head around that, and again, this is going back to what we were saying with Pam earlier, going back to accepting the why and not necessarily the what, right? Looking at, okay, why did I respond that way? Which means we've got to be compassionate, though, right? Setting aside those judgments. Does that show up in your meetings? Compassion, like, do you talk about, when you're looking at managing thoughts and behaviors and feelings, is compassion a topic that shows up in your conversations?
I talk about self-compassion often.
Yeah,
Setting aside that judgment about myself and accepting myself for who I am, right where I am. And I may be hurting. I may be in a challenging situation, and I may not be um, always positive, and it's
mm,
okay to not always think positive, because life can throw some things at you. So I think I do stress self compassion a lot, and having compassion for others. When you get into unconditional other acceptance,
yeah,
if somebody is treating you a certain way, well, they might be going through something right now that is causing them to be dysregulated. So they're taking it out on you. It's not personal, it's just what they're going through right now. So trying to not make it all about me all the time, and trying to think about the world in general, and ha- that other people are going through things just like I am, and accepting them. They might just be having a bad day, and I have bad days too.
yeah.
So,
It's interesting how we, as people, the one thing that I think that does show up quite a lot inside of any of the different meetings that I've been involved in, is this kind of personalization of things, right? When other people are reacting, when other people are saying things, when other people are doing certain things, it's all about me. Right. And when I say that, I don't mean it's all about me. I mean, like, for everybody, it's like they're doing this deliberately to me. They're doing this, they're saying this deliberately about me. They're responding this way because they don't love me, or because it's very kind of this like individual, personalized way of looking at it. How do you deal with that if that shows up when people start talking about that sort of stuff? Or
Well,
do you?
for myself, I'll say like what you were just describing, it happens to me when people don't come back to my meeting. Like there's somebody who doesn't show up at my meeting. I'm like, what did I say? What did I do? And it's like, for me, I've gotten to a point now where it's not just what if they don't like me? It's like, well, what does it mean if they don't like me? Right. And then working from there. And it's like, it doesn't mean that. I know it doesn't. And at the same time, I still have, that part of me that pops up when certain people just aren't there. And it's like, did I do something wrong? Have I said something wrong? And it's not the old me, to be honest, is where it's like, I think I've grown in this, is the old me would demand from those people to let me know, to alleviate me from this thought process. Whereas the me today is going, well, what is it that I'm tying to that thing that I have no control over? And it's like, and I've already gotten to the point where I know it's not true, yet it's still there. When certain people don't, I don't know, call, or they don't show up at the meeting, but when it comes to, just to pull it back to compassion, for me, it's first defining the word, because I think it's a word that's misused a lot. And I don't
Oh,
want
yeah.
to say that, I don't want to tell a person that they're wrong when they use it. I just want to define it so I can understand what they mean when they say it, so I can work from that place.
Definitions are huge, man.
They are. And I use what you say when it comes to compassion. To me, is the ability to remove a judgment from a situation, like whether good, bad, whatever. I just want to be able to listen. And from there, I can start to empathize and put, because I have a part of me when I listen to people that goes, I'd never fucking do that. And like, I used to think that was just my, ability to say, well, I wouldn't. To me now, it's my self-aggrandizer that's judging the hell out of what people are saying often. And it gives me an inability to empathize. So I can say, well, how could I do that? And when I explain this to some people, they go, well, I don't need to do that. And it's like, okay, and that's fine. I don't do it to be helpful to other people, though. When I'm practicing compassion or empathy with others, I do it for myself.
Yeah.
So that I'm not walking around with ruminations of screwed up people all around me. Because by practicing compassion and empathy, I bring internal peace, even if it's not true. And when somebody says, well, how do you know if that's why? And I'm like, I don't, but it helps me sleep at night.
Yeah.
Like, just because you say, you know what, Aaron, sometimes people are just assholes. And it's like, I that is great. And at the same time, there's a part of me that wants to go, yeah, but why? Is he hurting inside? Is like, to Jody's thing, it's like, you don't know what he's gone through. And I do that. I'll be like, you know what? He may be going through a divorce. I don't know, but it helps me alleviate what that person's doing that's activating me inside.
Yeah, and the whole that statement that somebody said to me really early on in recovery, when I was trying to accept other people and bring an understanding to what it was that in me that was making people look at things this way, and I was trying to be accountable and humble and like really throwing myself into this way of looking at things. And this guy just sat me down and says, you know what, Steve, I really admire what it is that you're trying to do, but at the end of the day, sometimes people are just fucking assholes and there's nothing you can do about it. Which kind of gave me permission to take a step back from it. And like you say, though, just because somebody is an arsehole doesn't mean that that's who they are as a person, as an individual. Maybe they're just reacting that way, they're behaving that way as a protection mechanism. Maybe they're going through a bad day and, I don't know. I don't know why they're behaving that way. Right? It allows.
That's where boundary settings come in.
Yeah.
And that's part of point 3 as well, setting healthy boundaries with people, right?
How do you talk about that inside of me? Because boundary setting is something that, man, that comes up in a lot of different meetings that we do, particularly when we start talking about interacting with other people, obviously. Well, I need to learn how to set healthy boundaries. And that can be a really sticky kind of conversation to have with people. How do you guys talk about boundary setting inside of the SMART meetings that you do?
PIVA. Pam, are you familiar with PIVA?
Not yet. I haven't read the whole book yet.
Me neither. But I thought I'd throw it out there. It's one of our new tools, Stephen.
Oh, the new Smart Recovery Handbook, right? So for those of you that might be watching this, there is a brand new Smart Recovery Handbook that's come out recently, and I do believe we've got in the future there you go. Pam is showing it on the screen. I do believe in the future we're gonna expand the conversation after we've gone through the 4 points, and we're gonna talk about some of the new things that have come up in the new handbook, providing everybody's up for that conversation. But so right now then, okay, so you haven't explored the new philosophy that's in the new Smart Recovery Handbook about that. How do you deal with boundary setting right now when it comes up in your conversations?
Well, I like to tell people they don't always have to tell the other person what their boundaries are. I mean, you can set boundaries with just walking away if you need to, or things like this. And sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
I used to say, and I share this quite a bit in the relationship meeting that I do. I used to say, you can always set a boundary with your feet.
Yes,
But then,
exactly.
but somebody took me literally and said, so does that mean I kick them?
Oh,
I was like, no, that's not what I mean. What it means is you can set boundaries with your actions. You don't have to set boundaries with your words, right? You can,
that's where the acceptances come in too, right? Like you
yeah,
can accept someone and say, this is the way this person is, but you don't have to tolerate the way they treat you.
yeah,
And you can determine, you know, that your value is more than what this person is treating you like, you know. And I try to explain that to people, because a lot of the time I feel like self-worth is a big issue
yeah.
in the meetings, so I like to try to point that out.
It's interesting that you said your value is bigger, or your value is different in that. So setting boundaries is around your own values. Then setting boundaries is around what you believe is respectful, what you believe is
Mm-hmm.
okay from other
Yes.
people. Yeah.
And that's where
Yeah.
the hierarchy of values is really helpful to figure out what those beliefs about those values are.
Yeah. Yeah. What about anybody else with boundary setting? How do you guys go through
Something
it?
something that I come across a lot in my meetings is people are fearful to set boundaries with people that are in their lives,
Hmm.
right? They don't exactly know how to approach that topic, how to go about it, things like that. And what I try to encourage is thinking of it a little bit differently, right? Because I've had people tell me that they're viewing it as like telling another person, here's a rule that you have to follow. And we all know what happened when, well, at least I know what happened when I was told I had to follow a rule. I broke it every time. But in practicing smart and in the recovery lifestyle, my accountability to self has become so much stronger.
Yeah.
I encourage it more to be looked at as like I'm setting my own guidelines for how I want to behave.
Yeah.
And if another person is going to choose to behave in a way that doesn't coincide with my guidelines for myself, I can inform them what my actions are going to be, pertaining to that. So rather than tell somebody, you're not allowed to drink at my home, I tell them, if you're here, I don't drink here. And if you want to drink, I'd like you to go somewhere else. Basically, it's like I am still kind of setting that, like, there's no drinking here, but I'm not telling them what they can or can't do. I'm telling them that doesn't happen here. You're welcome to partake and enjoy somewhere else, right? If that's what you desire. Um, that's kind of how I approach boundaries.
It's like you're asking them to respect your beliefs, right?
Yeah.
You know, somebody said to me years ago, I'm using that sentence a lot today. Somebody said to me years ago that people who struggle, and to be perfectly frank with you, I lost my shit when this person said this to me, and I got all angry at them, which later on I realized why. But somebody said to me years ago that he said, you have a hard time setting boundaries with people. And I was like, yeah, I know, I really struggle with it. And he said, people who struggle with setting boundaries also struggle with self-respect. And I was, screw you, lost my shit, because he was basically saying that I don't respect myself, which I didn't. But at the time I couldn't handle hearing that. Because what we're doing when we're setting boundaries, and I think this is what you both of you are saying here when we're talking about it as well, is that we're asking people to respect what it is that we want, what it is that we believe. Like, so respecting our own values, our own beliefs, the way that we want to be, so the way that we want to be, and therefore the expectation that we have on other people about the way that we want them to be as well, if they want to be around us. Does that ring true for you when it comes to setting boundaries?
It does. For me, I'd say the expectation thing is a big thing. Like for me, it's the evaluation I'll do with where you talk about capable, able, willing. And with myself, it's I set boundaries with myself that sometimes require the communication with others. It's the best way. Like I'm setting this boundary with me. It's not about you, but I need to talk to you about it, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
from what I know about Piva is it's positive, I statements, validation, ask for help. So
Okay.
in a sense, it's almost like Smart's Dear Man is what I say. And we
Given
used to
fast.
have, yeah, it is. And it's, they used to, this is funny. They used to have something called PIUS.
Yeah,
And I
I
was
remember
like,
that. Yeah.
well, and I'm like, we're a non-religious organization. First acronym, pious. Like maybe we should change up these acronyms a little. So I think that's why they've gone with PIVA. But it is like you say, a give fast kind of way that I can ask for help. And that's the other thing when I'm asserting a boundary. Like I say, it's for me, but I want the person, like you say in Dear Man, to know what they're going to get from this.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes by humbling myself in a sense and saying, "Can you help me with this?" You know, it does get the person to maybe respond in a more amicable way, I guess, rather than saying, "I need you to stop doing this," or "I need you to do." It's like, "Can you help me by," to Thomas's example, I'd really appreciate it if, you know, if you weren't to drink here. It would help me to know that you respect my beliefs, respect my boundaries, and I would appreciate that. You know what I mean? It's a kind, gentle way of saying it to a person rather than saying, you know, "It pisses me off when you come here and you don't respect my boundaries." Um, so yeah, it just, for me, it's about finding, I guess, a comfortable delivery, because I'll say this too, Stephen, for because you've brought this up before about responding to a boundary as if it's a form of punishment, in
Yeah.
that it's actually a way of negotiating to have a healthy relationship. If I wanted to punish you, and I would just push you away, but here I am trying to bring you in by saying, and I'll tell you, one with me was a friend once that said, "Could you call before coming over?" And I snapped at it. "Well, I don't call before coming over. What are you talking about, dude? I never ask you to call before coming. Why should I have to call before? You know what? I'm not even going to come to your house. You want
Yeah.
to call before I come over?" Right? It's like, whoa, all he was trying to do, and that was years ago, but I remember that. And it's like, all he was trying to do was say, "Could you call before you come over?" That's it. But I turned it into this whole attack of, you know, and also I would
You don't
never
want me
ask.
to come over.
You obviously don't, and you're doing things when I'm not around that you don't want me to see. That's why you want me to call when you come. You know what I mean? Are you screwing my girlfriend? I'm sorry, but that's like where my head went.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
like
got it.
all this
All
person
those
was
mistrusts.
asking.
Yeah, yeah,
Total. And but yeah, I look back at that kind of stuff where I didn't respond well to boundaries.
Yeah, I had a hard time setting boundaries when I was first in recovery, and it, like you said about self-respect, when I started to value myself
Mm,
and think of myself as, I'm not worthless. I am a person of value and I do deserve good things sometimes. That's really what led to my divorce. When my husband drank and he wasn't treating me right, and I realized that it wasn't the way I wanted to live anymore. And that was the ultimate boundary I set. Was I told him, I said, if you want to stay together, we need to go to couples counseling.
mm.
And he refused. So that was his choice. I gave him the choice if he wanted to stay in my life, and he didn't. So, you know,
Would you say that your work around through smart recovery and your work around accepting yourself helped you to shift towards being more capable of setting boundaries with other people?
oh, yes, definitely. Once because I really thought I was just a worthless, no
Mm.
good piece of crap person
Yeah.
that wasn't good for anything. And then the further I got away from alcohol and cigarettes and cannabis, and the more I came to meetings, the more I realized that, people like me. I'm kind of a good person and I have worth and value. And it was a huge shift in the way I thought about myself, and the whole exercise in unconditional self acceptance that I did with myself, um, just kind of catapulted me to a new sense of self worth. And I was able to set these boundaries, like, because I really thought that I couldn't survive on my own. Like, I
Yeah.
really thought that I needed somebody to take care of me. But now I'm like, I'm independent, I'm working, I'm living alone, I'm taking care of myself. And I don't think I would have ever gotten here without
Yeah.
the help of Smart.
Yeah. So like Thomas was saying though that people often fear setting boundaries with other people. Sometimes I know for me, asking somebody to respect my my belief, my value of treating me with respect, not doing certain things, like this is who I want to be and this is the expectation. If I was going to ask somebody to behave that way, they would tell me to screw off and leave, and therefore I'd just be on my own. So in early recovery, I was so afraid of people walking away and leaving me, abandoning me, or leaving me for because I was setting boundaries. I never set them,
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
which really just spoke to my own lack of self-respect.
Hmm.
What
Definitely.
what you're talking about came up in a meeting recently where somebody was talking about the leverage they have in their household,
Mm,
and because they aren't paying the bills and they're not providing much when it comes, they have a fear of being able to speak their mind
yeah,
because of exactly what you were just saying. And I took what Thomas was kind of the approach is, and and that's where I think there's a part of us that thinks that I'm laying down the law and that there's going to be this
yeah,
strong pushback. And it's like, it really is delivery. And that whole capable, able, willing thing it keeps coming back to that. If I put myself in a circumstance where I'm living in a home with somebody who isn't capable, able, and willing, that's its own other discussion. But if we can evaluate and say, you know what, I actually haven't tried to have this discussion to see if this person is willing. And in my experience, like with people in my intimate circle, I've walked away from some of these conversations going, oh my God, that went a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. And when it gets done to me the other way now, it's like, that wasn't so bad, actually. Like
yeah,
we had a good conversation. I understand the parameters, but the fear is all up here. It's the stories that we're telling ourselves about, like, well, what does it mean if this person doesn't like what I'm, well, it means they're going to kick me out of the house.
yeah,
It means, and what does it mean if I'm out of the house? I can't take care of myself.
yeah,
Right. There's these stories that start coming up. It's like, which may be and may not be true. I'm not saying that that's never
yeah.
true. It's just let's work from there because it may not be, right? And we won't know unless we move forward. But I do want to say that I really felt sympathy, I guess, for this person that was sharing their experience
Mm,
because of the leverage of the scenario. And I was like, I totally get what you're saying. And as kids, that's where we were at. That's why we went
yeah,
into distract mode. It's like, well, we can't go up to our parents really and say, you know what, if you don't do this, I'm out of here. So what do? We slam our bedroom door and play video games. Where the fuck, for me, it was that. Um, but
I
yeah,
ate candy alcoholically.
there you go.
I just
All
did
right.
a lot of homework. I was in the advanced gifted classes, so I just did homework all the time.
I wasn't
This
smart
is,
enough for that.
I was gonna say, I'm over here playing video games. She's doing trigonometry.
I
It's like
was. I was
Lisa
tutoring
Simpson.
in it.
It's awesome.
And I'm just stuffing my face with sugar.
Yeah, we all ended up at Smart.
Here we are.
Here we are.
So, are there any when we're talking about managing thoughts and feelings and behaviors, right? We've covered quite a few of the tools that Smart Recovery brings up. We talked about ABCs. We've talked about disputing ineffective or unhelpful beliefs. We've talked about brainstorming. We've gotten into setting boundaries with people. Anything unconditional, obviously the unconditional self-acceptance and acceptance of others and life. Anything else that you use when it comes to point three inside of your meetings to try to help people manage these thoughts and feelings and behavioral responses?
One
Something
thing
that
that
oh, go ahead, Jody.
Oh, I was just gonna say one thing that I talked about more recently was problem solving.
Mm,
How when life always has problems, just because we're in recovery doesn't mean that negative things aren't going to happen, and it's how we deal with them now that we're if we choose to be sober, like it's how we deal with them without depending on substances. So problem solving is huge.
yeah,
And so in the handbook, it talks about, like you said, brainstorming, come to a meeting, bring your problem to your meeting, and get ideas from other people, and, write them down and like rate them, like from the ones you think you will do, the ones you think you won't do, like discard them, and then make a plan. Like, how are you going to approach this problem and what exactly are you going to do?
yeah,
Instead of ruminating about the problem, oh, this is the most awful thing that's ever happened. Well, that's not getting you anywhere.
yeah,
So, what are you going to do about it? It's making a plan and carrying out the plan
yeah,
to try to solve the problem. And then if it works, pat yourself on the back, document your solution, and, maybe report back to your meeting that, hey, this was a success, and or this is still going on. It's like it's part of that community that we get together in our meetings, and we get to know each other, and we share our experiences. It's all part of the recovery process.
Yeah. I think the big
Yeah.
thing about problem solving for me, there's two things that are really important when you start talking about problem solving. Number one is being open to hearing other people's points of view and not coming back with my favorite yeah but. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, but
that
that's
wouldn't
not
work.
going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, but I've tried that and no. Yeah, but it's not really gonna apply to this situation, right? Being open, and then the thing that you said, taking an action,
Hmm.
right? Taking an action that we can evaluate and look at this. Was this successful? If not, let's go back and brainstorm again. So yeah, I love that. Thomas, you were going to say something about what you do?
Yeah, I mean, uh, it's not like in the book or anything, but what I often talk about is just mindfulness practices and being aware of how I'm behaving, how I'm talking, how I'm doing things, and um, it's such a practiced skill. It's not something that you know I don't know a single person in the world where you tell them be more mindful and then they got it down. But one of the best ways for it that I've found that even myself is not the most frequent with it, but I'm working on becoming more frequent with it is journaling and writing down the day and writing down how things progressed and played out and what I was thinking about at the end of the day and what stressed me out, what bothered me, what do I think I could have done better? What do I think or what do I wish I would have done better? And maybe I don't know how, but I can write it down and think about it and actually plot that out. Um, because without taking notice and taking um, uh, record of these things in my own mind, uh, I there's no processing going on. If it just is a fleeting thing that happens throughout the day and then the next day and then, something happens that's similar. I'm like, oh, maybe I have been in this situation before, but I didn't write anything down. I have no idea what I did or what I didn't do. So I have no frame of reference to make a new course of action. Um, the journaling is a really cool piece of it that um, I like to encourage people to do that I don't do as much as that I encourage. But yeah.
Listen, man, I'm really honest when I talk about my experience with journaling. I used to tell people, so my support network, when I first started the recovery journey, kept telling me, you got to journal, you got to journal. And I used to tell them, yeah, I'm journaling every day. No, I wasn't. I was bullshitting my way through it right from the beginning, constantly telling people that I was doing it. And the only time that I actually started to do it was when that one of my support network said to me, "So listen, like, can we go over some of your journals? Can we take a look at them? Because there's something that's not shifting here, something that's not right." And I was like, "Oh shit."
Let me write 2 years worth of journals tonight.
Give me a day
Yeah,
and
give
I'll
me a
get
day. I'll be
back to
right
you.
back with you.
And
Uh,
I think journaling is something that there is a ton of pushback on from people, right? But it is one of the most effective things that we can do to build awareness, to understand what's going on, so that we can start to look at managing those thoughts and feelings and behaviors. Because if we're not aware of what the thoughts and feelings and behaviors are that we're trying to work on, how are we gonna do anything about them? So I mean, that's a great point, Thomas, that you bring up.
and can I say, Stephen, to you, to your what you just said, I think that's how I've gotten in touch with the parts of my personality that I'm trying to work on. Is
Yeah.
setting a goal of journaling and then waking up and not doing it. Going, oh, there we go. I don't want to do it. I shouldn't have to do it. Fuck this. I would rather do this. So all those parts that come out at the moment of let's sit down and journal is where the work is at. But I wanted to say it's not in the book, but I know something that I've used in the past that I believe Smart still has is role play. So if
Yeah.
I was to, hey Jody, do you mind? I'm about to go through something. Can you help go through it with me?
Yeah.
And once again, this is a bit of brainstorming. So if Jody starts to respond and I'm like, no, that's not what they would never say that. I'm not playing the game right now. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's like, okay, Jody, can you say exactly what I want you to right now?
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not role play. So yeah, it is. It's about like almost best case, worst case, middle case scenario of what we're trying to get into here. And what is the feelings? Not necessarily what am I going to do, but how am I going to feel if this is the response? So I'm gonna ask them to call me back in an hour. They might call me back, they might not respond at all. How am I going to feel? You know, well, if they don't write back at all, I'm going to feel abandoned. I'm going to feel like, okay, you know what I mean? Why am I going to feel that way? What's the story I'm telling? I'm working from that place before I even go in, so that no matter what happens, I'm somewhat prepared for this emotional thing that's about to occur. It helps me when it comes to managing my feelings and thoughts going into a situation.
And that search that you're talking about brings you back to the ABCs, right?
It does.
Consequences that I'm kind of freaking out because this person isn't responding. I asked you to call me back in an hour, and it's been an hour and a half, and the consequence of that is that I'm losing my shit and I'm getting all mad, and I'm gonna do something that I don't want to do. So this big emotion, the activating event was the fact that they hadn't called me back. So what's the belief in the middle that's causing all these emotional reactions, right? Help us to get into looking at those things.
And on the surface, it might be something like, it means that he doesn't, or he's mad at me. Okay, what does it mean that he's mad at me? And without going through this whole thing, it ends with, it means I'm going to die alone. Okay, let's bring it back up to the top again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it really is, because there's this superficial answer. And then it's like, yeah, but what does that mean? You know, and I don't mean to be, as you were saying, like something like pedantic about it, you know, and it's like, but there is something beneath there. Some people don't want to dig. That's fine. For me, I do like to get down to the root and go, I can appreciate why you know, if there's a part of me that's really feeling like I'm going to die alone, I get why I'm getting so upset.
Yeah.
Is that what's happening? No.
Yeah.
You know, Stephen, it's something like, hey, dude, sorry, I didn't get your call. My phone died. What's going on? You know, and it's even though a part of me is like, obviously, he's so mad he never wants to talk to me again.
Yeah.
Right?
And we're the statement I like to use is that we are meaning-making machines, right? We attach meaning to absolutely everything, and this meaning is then inside of our thoughts. It's activating feelings, which is triggering behaviors. So getting to understand what the meaning is that we're attaching to stuff is that's absolutely essential, which we do through journaling, we do through mindfulness, we do through ABCs and all of the different tools that we've talked about today. Are there any other things that you guys want to touch on before we wrap things up on point 3 and move into point 4, living a balanced lifestyle?
Real quick, I just wanted to mention coping statements.
Yeah.
They are really helpful when I'm like, super distressed.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes when you're in a big emotional state, you don't have the wherewithal to sit there and do an ABC.
Yeah.
So when I do have the ability to do an ABC, I write down coping statements from my effective new beliefs in this book. So then when I'm, stressed out, I can flip through it and like read these coping statements.
Yeah.
And it's like a mantra that I can tell myself when I'm really upset.
Yeah. In schema therapy, we refer to those as flashcards.
Okay.
Right. So having flashcards with us to provide those different thought processes, those different statements that we can say, and we sometimes take it even further and do something called audio flashcards, where we take those statements, record them on like a phone or something like that, so that we can actually listen to the statement, not just read it. So yeah, those are incredibly important, really necessary. Right, because like you say, when you get into that state of distress, when you're not capable of doing an ABC, you're not capable of going through that particular skill set,
or if you're somewhere where you can't do tip or something like that.
Yeah, right. So it's like I need to have something tangible that I can turn to, and having those coping statements written down. I love the fact you carry that little red book around with you there. That's
yeah, it's small enough it fits in my purse. So if I'm out and about and I can't, splash cold water on my face or something, then it's perfect.
That's amazing.
You don't carry cold water in your purse, Pam? That's no, and I know we're pretty much finished here, but when Pam was saying that, I just thought like we don't have anything tip wise in Smart.
Yeah. And
it is a great tool when it comes to temperature. And I do use ice if I'm around it. It really does ground me.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't have anything like that in Smart.
It's about the tip skill in dialectical behavior therapy is about bringing yourself back into your body, right? Slowing things down, getting yourself back into that sense of grounding inside of your body. Like when we're drifting away, we're in distress, we're all over the place. Like using,
you know, the old comedy scene with the Stooges, and he wise guy smack him in the face. Whoa, you know.
I'm not saying to do that.
No, but I mean either. But I'm saying it's what it is, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's just bringing you back into the moment. All right, guys. Well, great conversation as always. Hopefully, those of you that are listening got something out of this. I know I did. It's been a while since I've gone over the smart recovery skills of point 3. In the next conversation, we're going to go over point 4, which is living a balanced lifestyle. But until that time, thank you very much for listening. Hope to see you again soon. Take care, be safe, and be well. See you soon.